My name's Jacki Schirmer, and I'm chairing this session. It should be a really interesting one. So we're talking about filling the gaps in wellbeing measurement. And filling the gaps in wellbeing measurement, as a data nerd, this speaks to my heart, because one of the challenges that we're getting to now, people are on board, they want to measure wellbeing, and sometimes our measures aren't quite stacking up or giving people the information they need to put wellbeing into action. So we're going to be hearing from 3 speakers who are talking about the different things they're doing to fill the gaps in wellbeing measurement, the challenges they hit along the way. Each speaker's going to talk first. Please feel free to put questions on Slido as they're talking, and then we'll have a panel at the end. So, with no further ado, I'll call up the first speaker, Franka Vaughan. And in the interest of time, I'm not doing big introductions. I'll let the speakers decide how much they would like to introduce about themselves, if that's okay with you. Thanks, and come on up.
Look at that. All right, hello everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Franka Vaughan. I am based at the Nosal Institute for Global Health, which sits within the Melbourne School of Population and Global Health at the University of Melbourne. And before I continue, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the unceded lands on which I live, learn, and play, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung, and Bunurong people, and pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to the custodians of the lands that we are gathered here today, as well as First Nations people who might be in the room and online. Okay. Well, there we go. So it's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm basically going to be introducing you to my postdoctoral research, so please bear with me. It's kind of focused on creating a co-produced or whole-of-system anti-racism approach, and I think maybe I should have kind of introduced exactly what I'm talking about. So the idea is in thinking about a well-being economy, how are we embedding racial justice? So that's what I'm going to be talking about mostly today. And my postdoc kind of, it builds on a few years of working in the anti-racism space in Victoria specifically. And here I've kind of put together some of the work that I've been working on, and I'm happy to kind of talk about this down the line. But the question that I would like to kind of consider today, and it's quite exciting that all the conversations yesterday and even today have kind of touched on some of these questions. So what does a fair Victoria, and in fact a fair Australia, actually look like? And who gets to decide or define what that fairness actually is? And I raise this question because most often, those who are actually affected by racial inequities are usually excluded from shaping what justice and well-being truly mean. And Jacki said, oh, she's happy about data. I'm not really going to talk about data. I'm going to ask you, in considering the data, we probably should be considering how we embed racial justice in that. So usually, their voices, their experiences are usually excluded. And when it's considered, it's usually as a data point, but it's not actually a foundation to policy design. So a good example for, is the Wellbeing Agenda, which Jacki talked about yesterday, measuring what matters, and which a lot of you will agree that it looked like it is a genuine promise that is aiming to kind of align economic, social, and environmental goals into a more holistic way. But I think Solace is around, Kate Solace and her team, I'm hoping it's around here in the room somewhere or at the other side. They kind of point out that the initiative or the framework has been largely sidelined. And one of the major reasons that they kind of hint at is this lack of deep, sustained community engagement, especially with First Nations people, and I would like to add in that other minoritized groups and communities. So they talk about how without this kind of engagement, the framework couldn't fully reflect what communities valued as kind of meaningful. The authors kind of argue that meaningful engagement could have ensured authentic representation, strengthened public trust, and even depoliticized the agenda, which I think is very important, because when we do that, it becomes our framework and not just something that politicians sat somewhere and decided, right? So my question then is, how do we design system? How do we shift this dynamic in the data that we are going to be talking about today? How do we design the data systems or our systems and our policies so that those most affected by inequity are leading the conversation on fairness and well-being, and not waiting to be consulted afterward? And this is something that I want us to be thinking about quite a bit. So when we talk about building a well-being economy, I believe it is actually quite vital to ask, how are we actually embedding equity? How are we thinking about structural change? What about anti-racist practices and policies, intersectionality, and also community empowerment in how we are designing this well-being economy? And I believe that some of these ideas are often taken for granted, because when we imagine a well-being economy, we talk a lot about living well, right? We talk about an economy that values quality of life, that values fairness, that talk about sustainability. But I want to kind of bring our mind to where we are. This is a settler colony, whatever your politics is, right? So our system are deeply shaped by settler colonialism, which means that we need to be able to acknowledge that the systems and structures are not neutral. They are unequal, and in fact, inherently, they are racist in how they've been designed. So while the concept of a well-being economy might imply opposition to racism, I think that by itself is not sufficient. And there's a lot of conversation that happened yesterday that didn't really pay attention to this. What I'm talking about is, for this idea to be truly transformative, we have to make racial justice quite explicit in what we are doing. And how are we making that explicit? In the data collections and how we are thinking about the design, right? So this means actively identifying and challenging policies, practices, cultural norms that reproduce inequity, and even within systems that claim to promote well-being. And I believe the starting point is the recognition that racial justice is not just a side issue. And unfortunately, in Australia, it happens to be quite a bit. But I think it should be foundational to how we are building this well-being economy. So embedding racial justice, it requires more than sort of declarations and strategies. It requires rethinking relationship between communities, institutions, and government systems. And here I want to kind of acknowledge that the harmful impacts of racism as it relates to mental and physical health is actually well documented in Australia. There's been a lot of research that has gone through. And this has led to this increasing acknowledgement of racism as a serious problem in Australia. And so we have, for example, we've done the National Anti-Racism Framework, Australia. Victoria last year, we introduced our anti-racism strategy, and there's a lot of information going on around anti-racism in universities. But then the challenge is that actually the evidence of the effectiveness of anti-racism effort is actually quite limited. Meaning what is happening is that there's, yes, at the back of these frameworks and strategies, there's a lot of guesswork that is actually going on in this space, because we actually don't measure what actually works, right? What I've seen in the different work that I've been doing, what I've seen is that we tend to focus a lot on the interpersonal aspect of racism without really thinking about the structural and institutional racism that actually legitimize the interpersonal racism that we seem to be quite obsessed with. And also for some reason, Australia, we seem to be a bit late to the conversation about race and racism and how that is actually quite prominent to who we are as a society, right? So there's little literature that, the literature shows that there's actually a lack of shared understanding of what racism actually is. Within whichever pockets of community that you go to, we understand racism differently, right? So this is where I feel like when I actually apply to the conference, I'm like, oh, maybe I should wait until like my third year when I actually have real evidence to show you. So bear with me. A lot of this is based on some of the other work that I've done. But I think this is where my postdoc, to kind of introduce you to the work that I'm doing in this space. So it has two main focus. It has a focus on evidence mapping, but also racial literacy. And I was just in a session that was talking about well-being and literacy. I think racial literacy is really important because we need to be able to talk about the problem for us to be able to find solutions to the problem. Yeah. So in terms of I'm hoping, or I want my postdoc to be able to make an intervention in this well-being economy by positioning anti-racism as a structural foundation for societal excellence, well-being, equity, and sustainability. So I'll just briefly kind of introduce you to the different sections. So this is the first part of my postdoc, which is kind of mapping a cross-sectoral anti-racism interventions that adopt a systems approach. Again, I talked about how there's a lot of work going on, but we don't actually know how that works. So one of the work that I'm doing is trying to develop measures in terms of how to look at these different, we talked a lot yesterday about evidence. What is the evidence? What does the data say? What can we learn from that? And then this is the work that another work that is part of the work that I'm doing is racial literacy, actually co-design racial literacy in key sectors. So currently, I'm focusing on universities, I'm looking at local governments, and I'm looking at the sports sector, because these three sectors are actually shaping, they are sectors that are foundational to shaping public norms and distributing opportunity. So for example, my aim with the racial literacy is to promote deep cultural change by enhancing the ability of individuals and institutions to recognize and understand and act on the structural and interpersonal dimensions of racism. I've recently done a pilot at Melbourne University, and it's really interesting to talk about racial literacy in the higher education, where everybody is supposedly very liberal and very anti-racist. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of the evaluation from that in some other forum. But the idea here is to really create cultural safety. So how are we creating environments where minoritized people feel respected and safe from discrimination? I believe that should be quite important to our idea of this well-being economy. How are we kind of promoting equity-driven governance? So strengthening the role of local governments and institutions in fostering policy and service delivery that are inherently anti-racist. How are we doing that if we don't even know how to talk about race in the first instance? And of course, yesterday we talked a lot about community connection and lack of belonging. So how does anti-racism and being racially literate actually contribute to community cohesion and trust? Do I have a minute to end? Excellent. So just some ideas that I'm kind of working towards. So yeah, what this means, or what I'm exploring at the moment in thinking about a well-being economy that is inherently anti-racist, is one that is kind of, again, embedding racial justice at every level of design and implementation, which requires, so my colleagues will come and talk about data, right? So data collection that exposes and addresses systemic inequities, particularly among First Nations people, as well as other racialized communities. Also, policies that are co-designed with affected communities. And also, most importantly for me, anti-racism becomes a measurable well-being economy, and I'll look to Jacki and her colleagues to kind of do the measurable aspect, but with explicit goals to eliminate disparities in health, income, education, and justice. And I believe we are all kind of committed to that, but we need a bit more explicitity, I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say in thinking about some of these things. Thank you so much.
Explicitity is my new favourite word, and I think it's one we all need to use because it is a real problem. We tend to hide things. We tend to use euphemisms, particularly in Australia. We don't like talking directly about some of these things, and I absolutely agree with you that that's a big issue when we need to take a systems view. Those of us who produce a lot of data and measures need to actually do something about that. All right, I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Matthew. Come on up, tell people who you are, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Oh, I've lost my first slide. Oh, there it is. So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Matthew Iasiello. I'm a mental health researcher based in Adelaide. I work for an organisation called BeWell Co, which is a social enterprise focused on delivering sort of psychological skills training, but we also do a lot of evaluation. And we're owned by Camp Quality, which people may be more familiar with, which is a charity that supports kids living with cancer and their families. And so anything we generate rolls up to the charity, which is a really nice structure. And I spend 2 days a week at the University of Adelaide on some funded research work. But today what I want to talk about is this idea of working towards consistency in wellbeing science, because we have this issue, as we've named a few times, and anyone that heard Lindsay before talking about the role of language and the lexicon of wellbeing will know that it's a very confused space. So people will be familiar with this issue, perspective. From my position, it looks like a 6. From your position, it looks like a 9. We both think we're wrong. And it's a little bit the same when it comes to well-being. So it's life satisfaction. What are you talking about? Actually, it's this, or whatever. The problem is, this keeps going. I'll let you take your photo. It keeps going. That's the problem. All right, I'm glad I got a little giggle there. I can tell you that there's about 400 different ways that we talk about well-being, because we've gone down the path of actually reviewing measures of well-being where we didn't really hold the definition of well-being very tightly, but if you call it well-being, we'll believe you. We found about 150 different measures of well-being. They said they were measuring 400 different things, but when you get to the bottom of it, we were sort of able to thematically summarize them into about 21 different dimensions. And so why is inconsistency a problem? And I'll just put the caveat that when we're talking about, or when I'm talking about well-being, I'm talking really in the context of mental well-being rather than this broad idea of, your whole of life, which is not less important or more important, but just to be clear. Why is it a problem? There's the first one, which is the equivocation fallacy, I think. You hear this everywhere. Every evidence says it improves well-being. What are you talking about? Are you talking about autonomy? Are you talking about life satisfaction, connection, belonging? What does it actually mean? It ends up kind of being meaningless. It's like the worst sales pitch of all time. It improves well-being. Well, well-being does everything and nothing. There's scope creep. Where does well-being end? I had a friend that worked in a council, and she had a well-being role, and she got lumped with making sure the bins were getting cleaned. And, because, hygiene, that's well-being, isn't it? Well-being itself doesn't inspire actionable steps. So when we talk about this broad idea of well-being, well, I want to improve my well-being. Now what? And the last one is that systematic reviewing is impossible. This is my own problem because we do a lot of systematic reviewing. We did a big review of interventions designed to improve mental well-being. We found 23,000 papers that we went through the abstracts. We didn't know about AI a couple of years ago. And we excluded 20,000 of them. And it's basically because everyone puts well-being as a key word in their academic papers. So that is quite annoying for people who do that work. So we put together a bit of a multidisciplinary international team, a couple who are here at the conference, to really get to the bottom of what can we build consistency. And really this is just step one, basically. But what we did in a series of studies, and I'm going to talk about the third one, was first a review of measures of well-being. And it was basically measures of it was an umbrella review of measures of well-being, of quality of life, and resilience and coping, because these are kind of terms that are sort of umbrella terms that partially overlap and kind of are picked up in the WHO definition of mental health. That's where we did that thematic review of all those 400 different words and got them down to a set of about 21. The second was to take all those measures and the items that they involved, sort them into those different dimensions, and test and construct what's called item banks for each of those dimensions. So we basically sorted through about 3,500 items, removed all the redundant ones, and there's so much overlap, I've felt, I'm satisfied with my life. I've been satisfied with my life. I am feeling, all these variations of the same thing, and that's out in preprint at the moment. And the last one was then to use those first two studies to put the results in front of an academic Delphi panel, basically a panel of academic experts, to basically vote on what do they think would constitute an important, meaningful dimension of what we ended up calling positive mental health. And that project, I should mention as well, is funded in part by the Department of Health Victoria as well. And thank you to the people who made that possible that are here in the room today. So in the expert panel, we basically defined experts because that's a problematic word in some respects, and it's one way of knowing, so another caveat. But basically, we wanted an expert to be someone who had published one of the most cited articles in the last 10 years across 11 different disciplines, which you see there. Because wellbeing doesn't sit in one place, it's part of the problem of these silos, so we wanted this multidisciplinary perspective, basically. You see the qualities of the panel, but most importantly, I think from my perspective, because it does live and die on the quality of the panel that you recruit, they had an average citation count of 12,000, roughly speaking, so pretty senior academics who had been in the field for a number of years from 26 different countries, again, caveat, mostly in the West. And we even got them to vote on what do we even call this thing. So we're working towards a taxonomy of mental health dimensions. Is it mental well-being? Is it wellness? Is it thriving, flourishing, you name it? They landed on positive mental health, so that's what we've adopted going forwards. So the way that it worked is, for people who are not familiar with the Delphi process, is that you basically put a survey in front of these academics and they vote. For example, they would have had an item like, how important is happiness as a dimension of positive mental health? Is it essential? Is it important? Is it peripheral? Or is it irrelevant? And basically, if they voted on the first two options, we would say that you've voted to include it in a taxonomy. And we had a consensus rule that if 75% agreed that this dimension should be in, then it made it into the final list. And you can see them highlighted in green. And you do a few different rounds of this study where you basically say, for the things that didn't make it, we'll give you another chance. And we'll say, actually, achievement got 73%, that's pretty close. Would you reconsider? They didn't really reconsider, which is pretty funny, which is also good. And so this is not a scientific term, but super consensus is the thing I'm sticking with. Of these are the dimensions that made it to 90%. And so I feel like that's really rock solid, basically. We can argue about the fringes and whatever, but this idea that meaning and purpose, life satisfaction, self-acceptance, connection, autonomy, and happiness are pretty fundamental when we're talking about our mental well-being or our positive mental health. Avoidant coping was the only one that was excluded, which is kind of nice because we didn't think it should be there anyway. But as we went through that process from study 1 to study 3, we didn't sort of make any editorial decisions. We just, whatever we found in the big review, we just kept it along the way. So then you see over rounds 2 and 3, there were a couple of dimensions added because at the end of round 1, we basically said, what do you think's missing? Obviously, our work started with what's been operationalized into a survey, but there's more to it, obviously than that. And so there were a few that were added and a couple there that made it over the line over the next couple of rounds. We also put in front of them a definition of positive mental health and basically said, weigh in and let us know what you think of this, which felt like being told you're an idiot by 120 different excerpts, but that's okay. And this is where they landed on, basically. Positive mental health is a personal and subjective experience when we are content with our lives, feel good, function well, and view ourselves favourably. Our level of positive mental health can vary over time and is influenced by the way we adapt to the problems and opportunities we face. It's impacted by many factors such as our environment, life experiences, cultural background, biology, and behaviours. Many people have some level of positive mental health, and we can improve it by taking action using a variety of means, even when we experience a mental health condition. And so there's kind of a high-level definition and then some sort of qualifying statements at the back there. And you'll see basically that these are the 19 dimensions that we ended with, that we landed on, and we've arranged them into the 4 themes that came through in the definition. So basically being satisfied with your life, with yourself, feeling good, and functioning well. And there's nothing scientific about the way we've sort of mapped it out. This is just purely for arranging. And people ask me about, what do the lines mean and the connections. This is just my artistic expression. And so they don't mean much. The point is these are all connected. We don't know how closely they're connected with each other. There are things in the background that will drive some of these things and not others in this kind of idea. But we're trying to move towards consistency as the point. And the last point here, I guess, was in terms of applications. So in terms of standardizing measurements, we have, this is obviously for subjective experiences as well, right? Objective is a different story. But we need to stop comparing life satisfaction with quality of life. You know, they're overlapping, but they're different. In terms of resource allocation, I think identifying and prioritising which dimensions are relevant for particular contexts will be a really important way to cost effectively and effectively target risk factors in different communities. This idea of precision intervention, so really understanding which interventions or which policies work for which outcome, getting a bit more targeted or precise in the way that we talk about improving well-being. And the last one is cross-sectoral collaboration. So I think we get the sense that well-being doesn't, like some departments would look at the word well-being and think that's not my responsibility, but something like a particular dimension might actually scream out to them a bit more. So something like belonging, I think people working in transport, in housing, in urban planning, in SEL programs, they would see belonging as, you know, their bag rather than this big thing of well-being. And so hopefully we can inspire a bit more collaboration there as well. And I think that's my time, so thank you very much. Oh. And if you can read that, that's a list of the contributors who agreed to be named. There's about 10 that wanted to remain silent. Cool, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant and fantastic work. All right, our third speaker is Marketa. So come on up, introduce yourself, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you.
Yes. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Before I begin, I'd like to recognise the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting here today, the Ngunnawal people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their leaders, past, present, and emerging, and especially the children and young people amongst them. And let's take this to sort of land us in the place of what I will be speaking to you today about. I'd like to narrow our focus a little bit, and I'd like us to think specifically about measuring well-being of children and young people. And I'll explain a little bit about age brackets in a moment, but I should probably introduce myself properly. My name is Marketa Reeves. I'm the project manager of the Australian Child and Youth Wellbeing Atlas, an initiative led out of the University of WA and the School of Population and Global Health, but certainly an initiative that is national in the sense that our team, our project, is best described as a coalition of the willing, a group of those who strive to make the data for and on behalf of children and young people more visible, more accessible and unified. And we're going forward this way. What is the Australian Child and Youth Wellbeing Atlas? We're a free national platform, and we map data on children and young people aged 0 to 24. So we've got children bracket 0 to 17, and then expanding to young people, so going up to 24. We map data for each state and territory and also nationally. So the Atlas allows you to look at the data against a national scale, as well as then to break it down and select a particular jurisdiction and look at one state or one territory and have the scale based on that. The Atlas is holistic. So we've just in the two preceding presentations heard about definitions of wellbeing and what is wellbeing, how do we define it. We use one of the most well-established frameworks of wellbeing for children and young people, ARACI. The NEST, the Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth, have published the NEST over 10 years ago now, and it identifies 6 key domains of children and young people's wellbeing. So we use the NEST to give a framework and to give a structure to the data, which otherwise could be quite overwhelming. When we first published the Atlas, the first national Atlas, 2 years ago, when we did our user evaluation study, a lot of users felt a little bit overwhelmed. There's over 1,000 data sets, now over 1,500. They went like, gosh, where do I start? What is really wellbeing? So we use the NEST and the domains in the NEST to then drill deeper into sub-themes and indicators of wellbeing. So it helps users to be targeted in what they're looking at, but also to get that holistic picture. We're really, really keen on making the data accessible. At the moment in Australia, the data landscape is incredibly fragmented. Data on children and young people is held in silos. It's held by individual departments, by research institutions. It is incredibly time-consuming, resource-consuming, and requires considerable capability, skill, and connection to get the data that you need, especially if you want to have a very clear and a holistic picture of how children are going. So we're hoping to bridge fragmented data sources. We're enabling grassroots action because by being free, we're making this data available for everybody. So to give you a little bit of history, this all started with researchers coming together about 10 years ago saying, okay, we're all wanting access to these administrative data sets, working with linked data. It's taking us an incredibly long time to each of us putting in ethics applications, data sharing agreements. Gosh, 2, 3, 4 years down the line, we're all holding the same data sets. Is this really economical? Does this make sense? So much time, so much effort, so much resourcing. So bringing this together, academic players, and then we very quickly realised it's not just the academic sector. I've spent most of my working life actually in the public sector, working in policy and research. The government sector has a need for that data as well. Just because you work for one department doesn't mean that you can go and ask for the department next door that holds data on children. And then there's philanthropy, there's not-for-profit, and there's communities themselves. An incredible movement at the moment with place-based action, and we're playing right into that. It's really encouraging to hear how important data is, and data literacy and data capability, but if the data is not available, or it takes people years to get a hold of it, and especially communities and those that are the most disadvantaged, if they don't have the capability or the resources to get hold of the data, it's very difficult for them to really bring about change. Very quickly, I won't dwell on this too much. I've kind of listed all our partners in what I've just said before, but I should recognise that we're currently funded by the Minderoo Foundation and the Ian Potter Foundation, but we exist because of this incredible partnership of that coalition of the willing. The prototype really was funded by the Australian Research Data Commons by a grant, and I can tell you all, it cost $500,000 to build this prototype, but it really cost millions, and those millions were contributed in kind by people working across these organisations and many more who all saw that need for this data to become more visible and more accessible. The NEST framework, for those of you who are not familiar with it, so these are the 6 domains, but if you're counting, you can see a 7th. Of course, the environment is an important... yeah, oh gosh, don't do that. I've got 3 children. I hear this all the time. 6, eh? The 7th domain, environment, was added just recently. And of course, not because young people tell us that this is really important, we all know that it is. And Aracy, as an organisation, have recognised this as well. So there's a lot of work underway. We have added the 7th domain, or we actually refer to the domains as themes in the atlas. Each of those themes have sub-indicators, or sub-themes, and then indicators, and variables underneath them. On our website, we provide a lot of contextual information around what is behind these indicators and what are some of the policy implications, or even answering the question, okay, and why is this important when I'm considering children's wellbeing outcomes? So we provide that policy context as well. And now, hopefully, I can give you a demonstration, because I could stand here, talk all day long, but I think it's most powerful if we try and do a demonstration. I'll have to go back to where the AV table is, and then...
Do you want to take a mic with you to keep chatting? Yes. So, I think that one's working. We'll see.
Is this working? This is working very well. If you wanted to jump along, those of you who've got their laptops open, you can just jump to australianchildatlas.com.au. To where? Oh, I see. Hang on, how do I make it bigger? So we've got a bit of a split screen happening here. We do demonstrations a lot. So a lot of our work is actually working directly with community organisations, government agencies, where we go in and do hands-on seminars and we show people how to use the platform. And so this is quite a common situation for us to have to... Yes, it's up there. Okay, I can see my mouse here. So this is our main website. I won't go into this too much, just to tell you that at the top you can see about information, those indicators from the NEST framework. If you'd like to scroll through, let me just click on learning. You see how many variables are hiding beneath that. So that's just a little bit of road mapping, wayfinding if you are new to the Atlas. So we see that under learning, we have 10 sub-themes, 42 indicators, and 249 individual variables or data sets that hide behind that. We've got some technical information and other resources here, but let's go into the Atlas. Now, when you first come in, a couple of ways to go in. If you're a new user, I encourage you to take the tour, which will take you around the platform and show you some of the key functionalities. If you're here for the 10th, 15th or 20th time and all you want to see are community data snapshots, you can go straight into here. And otherwise, for returning users, let's just click on here. So the Atlas will always open on number of births. That is just because we had to pick one indicator, so don't think that you've already done some pre-selections. It always opens a number of births. You can then go into the search box for region and start typing in. I'm just going to go with Belconnen. And I can hardly see this. I should have brought my glasses. Here we go. And see how that flies you into Belconnen and the data will start to build. You can then jump into neighbouring regions if that's what you want to see, but I'll just quickly show you what you can see on the map. So up here, you see the statistical resolution. So we work with the statistical areas. Classification determined by the ABS. If you're not familiar, imagine Australia like a large puzzle with 2,500 pieces, and each one of those pieces would be an SA2. So typically an SA2 is a suburb. As you get into rural or remote areas, geographically these areas get larger, but the population is smaller relatively. So you can click on this and then you can change whether you want to look at the results by SA2 or you want to go bigger, SA3 or 4, or if you want to look at local government area resolution. You can also, sorry, I can't even see what I'm pointing at. That's the year of the collection. So for each data set we have, typically we try and go back 20 years if that's available. Of course, it depends on the collection if that is the case. If you want to change that or see what is available, you click on here. And the same you would do with other levels of desegregation, including by age. If you want to change the theme, you can go into the theme search box. So we'll go here. All the themes are listed here. So you'll recognise those 7 themes that I spoke about at the start. So you can also just, click on one and then make your way through. Let's just jump on estimated population, ABS data, 5-year age groups, and you see how the data will change. Let's click on any region here. You can see the information plotted on a national scale. Probably don't have the time today to go into that too much, but this is all explained as part of the platform. You can change the colours if you're not too sure about the colour coding here. You've got ways to change that into a colour scale that would more agree with your visual needs. But let's go back to here, national distribution here, and then the time series. This is really important. So we've got our time series here. If I'm looking at population or births data, or perhaps I'm looking at, say, early development, I'm looking at the Australian Early Development Index data, I could then overlay with various services, such as with schools, health services, so that I can see what services are actually present in that particular area that I'm just looking at with my results. As a last thing that I want to show is when you click on national, and I mentioned this briefly. So if you're not interested in a national scale, but you want to see just the scale for that particular area, you can change this and you see how my entire results panel on the right-hand side has changed. So the scale and the plot are now showing ACT results only. And of course, that is now relative to other SA2s in the ACT. That's probably all we have time for. I think that gives you a sense though. I will just like to reiterate that, we can probably go back to the slides, thank you. I'd like to reiterate that there's close to 1,500 data sets there now. So the way to find your way around that is to, if you're not familiar with the nest, have a look at the indicators that we have included, or use the theme search box. It works very much like any other search box. You can start typing low birth weight, safety, community, satisfaction, whatever it might be, and whatever is in the atlas will then come up as a result. One thing I need to mention, and also leading to the overall theme and topic of the session today, is that when we look at gaps, the gaps in wellbeing measuring, those of you who are familiar with this body of data and what is available, I will not pretend and say that we have data for all the domains and that it's very satisfactory what we can see. It is quite the opposite. And Matthew, when you mentioned your super consensus items, we don't measure them for children. We don't ask them. We don't ask children and young people how they're actually going. And so we're shifting with the Atlas now our attention a lot into a field of advocacy perhaps, to say that one key point is to make data available that we hold, and that very often we don't make available, and yet we base our decisions on them. So particularly communities often feel these decisions have been made. We haven't seen the evidence for that. So that's one key thing. But secondly, particularly when it comes to our youngest generations and future generations and the impact on them, we're not measuring how they're going. Our mental health data for children and young people is 10 years old and can't even be disaggregated by state level, let alone anything more granular than that. So as you go into the Atlas, you will find that for some domains we're doing quite well. We've got strong measures, strong indicators, and nationally comparable ones, and in others, nada. A lot of jurisdictions do individual wellbeing surveys. Again, results from that very often not made publicly available. So there is a really, really striking data gap. In closing, our next steps, we have actually just launched this. What I was showing you there earlier is the second generation of the Atlas. So pretty much exactly 2 years after launching the prototype, this is the second generation. Much improved functionality, many, many more new things, including community data snapshot. So if you click on data snapshot, you can select any community in Australia and click generate report, and within 1 second, you'll have a report on a PDF showing 15 key indicators of child and youth wellbeing for that community, and you can pull it for any other community in Australia as well. So for us, next up will be improving the platform even further. We work very closely with our users, so if you happen to be using the platform in the next weeks or months, come back to us, let us know how you're finding it, if you've got any ideas for improvement, or in general, what sort of your thoughts are. We'll be looking at adding the smarts, as we like to call them, predictive modelling, of course, AI. The navigation of the platform can still be improved, and so we're looking at ways to do that. And we're doing a lot of work with regards to First Nations data governance. We've got our own steering group that is currently being formed. And we're looking at developing indices. It can be very overwhelming. There is a lot of data. How can we bring it together? Quick snapshot of our team. Most of us based in Perth, but not all of us. Quite a few are based in Brisbane. We have a particularly close relationship with QUT. So if anyone from QUT is here, so a number of us based in Brisbane, and that is us.
Thank you. That was 3 fantastic talks. Can I ask the panellists to come up and grab a seat? Sorry, I'm just getting off. And sorry, I had to say 6, 7. I couldn't resist. Okay, for those without children, I'm not going to explain 6, 7 because it makes no sense. But if you have children, you'll know it's a thing. How many people know what that is? Well, yep. How many of you have children? Yep. Or younger children, probably mostly teenagers or tweens up. Okay, if you've got questions, do please pop them on Slido, so do join it. There are a couple questions on already, and I'm going to start by asking the first one that's up there from Kate. So Kate Solis is here. Franka, I think you were asking about that, and she's asked a question, which I think applies to all of the panel. To what extent are wellbeing measures, terms and phrasings Western biased? Are these often globally utilised measures relevant for all communities? Who would like to start on that?
I can lead us off. It kind of leads on from what I was saying at the end, I feel. Yes, we're not pretending that this is the be-all and end-all of measuring wellbeing for children and young people. I think our work, particularly with communities and the current place-based action movement, demonstrates that one of the key things that we need to understand is that communities want to understand what evidence is being used to make decisions. And to bring about change, we need to know what is on the table, what we're using for our decision making, and then move forward. So if we want to improve the ways we measure, first of all, we need to be sharing what we're using at the moment, so we have an equal playing field, and there's equity in the sense of how we access information and the data and the decisions that are based, or, you know, the information and the data that informs the decisions that we make. So I would say that's almost a second step to then look at, you know, how can we improve the measurement and what should be measured.
Sure. Yes is the answer. Yes, they are. But what I would say, because I think there's a lot of argument around, you know, which of these dimensions are universal, if there are any. I think the really important thing for us to hold on to is that the dimensions, though limited, are not prescriptive. So if we think that meaning and purpose is important, we're not telling you what should drive a sense of purpose for you, or what's, you know, there's no ethical assumptions there, basically. And I think exploring these cross-culturally is really important.
Hello? Yeah. I think I kind of agree with what has already been said, and not to kind of belabor the point. A lot of this, first of all, the question that you asked, yes, it's a lot of the data is collected in this kind of framework that sometimes don't even speak to the communities that it's talking about. So let's start from there. Do the communities even understand what those data points actually mean and what it's measuring? So a lot of the work that we do with the communities, they're like, oh, you guys sit in your universities and you come up with all these plans and you decide how we are feeling and how we are doing. So I think there is a need to rethink a lot of the system. I think a lot of these conversations were had yesterday, even around the concept of growth and what does that mean? Is all growth okay? So is the data that we are collecting, is it still serving the community that we are supposedly serving? Is it really representing them well? So there's a need to really rethink around what these data points or what these measures, what do they actually mean? What is going into them? Yeah, I think I'll end there.
Excellent, thanks for that. And yeah, it really does highlight that need to surface what we're actually doing so people can critique it and say what's missing. I'll go through some more of the Slido questions, and then I do have a question for you as someone who collects data a lot myself, but I get to leave mine to the very end and probably ask it of you at lunch. Okay, how can we ensure that indicators are child and youth centred, and how can they be meaningfully engaged in using this data for their own youth advocacy? So Marketa, probably a question for you, but keen to hear
By asking
all
children.
perspectives.
By asking children and young people themselves. And that, you know, and that's perhaps a slightly simplistic answer, but at least including children and young people in the survey design, or if we're looking at data capture, data collection, we need to consider where children are at, their age, their developmental stage, but we cannot just make it from a perspective of, you know, an adult who's an expert in their field. So that is a key thing. Like you have spent many, many years in data collection, particularly with student surveys, so going into schools and surveying students, both quantitative surveys as well as qualitative, and we just don't harness that power that is in that. There is so much to be learned from children and young people, and we just don't do it really well. And what we also don't do really well is then feeding that back and taking real meaningful action with children and young people at the table. Although, can I just add that I find in the last couple of years that there seems to be much more momentum. Young people seem to be, and I think in a previous session someone mentioned that voting participation in political discourse is one of the very few indicators where we're going forwards and where there is an increase. And I feel that young people are really going, no, this ship is not going in the right direction, and we want to be at the table to help steer this in the right direction. So I'd probably say that I can see some positive signs, but I'll pass on.
Excellent. Anyone else like to comment on this one?
Just I mean, when we think about data, in my mind, a lot of it comes down to how hard quantitative data, which is very important because it gives you the trends and the highlights. But one thing that really stuck with me yesterday is this, I think you said it or somebody, the tyranny of averages. And that is really, really important. So yes, we need to involve young people, but maybe should we be also considering the different ways of collecting that data? Should we be considering other forms of not just like the numbers, but what are the stories behind those numbers? Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, we have a question for you, Franka. So, what are your views on addressing racism amongst older Australians, given their reluctance to face into it? So, not a hard one at all.
Can I just give some context?
Yes.
I didn't have enough words. I work specifically in the aged care space, and you see it not only from our older customers to the care workers, but vice versa. And that extends not just to racism, but often how you identify your sexuality. And I'm just very curious to understand, especially because a lot of our customers might be experiencing early signs of dementia.
So, for those online, the questions come from, is it Gillian or Gillian? Gillian, who's talking about particularly the aged care sector context.
That's a very hard question. Thank you for that. Oh, yes. So we actually did a bit of research looking at like Africans kind of nearing that age and how sometimes they revert back to maybe their local language and all. I think it's kind of similar. It starts with conversation. It starts with being comfortable having some of these very, very difficult conversations. Just this morning at the hotels, a very older gentleman was fascinated by my hair and was wondering how many hours it takes, which is a very legitimate question. So how do we receive it? And how do we have those open conversations around it? We talk a lot about multicultural Australia. So that means we need to be very comfortable having difficult conversations. We make the assumption that older Australians are racist. Perhaps they are, but are we meeting them where they are? Are we making them understand what this multicultural Australia actually means? So I think we can have more conversation about this down the line, yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, we've got a couple questions on the Atlas, and I might read them out together. So the first one was, what are the most urgent policy priorities that are emerging from the Atlas data? And can jurisdictions, different states and territories in Australia, have their own data portal for children wellbeing that feeds into the National Atlas?
Yes, so firstly, I will highlight that the Atlas is providing a data infrastructure, and we're inviting academics, partners, stakeholders and users to use that data to then frame policy propositions, write papers and do those things. So yes, while I have my own views, and of course there are a lot of other initiatives, I will just point out the Future Healthy Countdown 2030. Those are initiatives really focusing on policy action and immediate policy action. So what we're providing with the Atlas is first and foremost a data infrastructure. That to answer the first question. And the second one, yes, we want to ensure that there is less duplication and less overlap. There is currently a lot of development going into integrated data assets, unified data assets. The last thing we want is that each state and territory ends up with its own atlas, and not just for child and youth wellbeing data, but overall. Let's look at building assets that really feed into each other without giving up the data sovereignty. So without having to send data across for those who are sort of not in data land as much. So we don't need to send data from A to B. Data can stay with the custodian. We can still provide it to an asset and to then a visualisation platform. So what we would like to see is unification and as few data assets as possible that bring in all this data from the different places.
Excellent. Now I'm just going to check, are there any urgent questions from the floor? People who'd really like to ask one from the floor? We've got... Yep, yell it out and I'll repeat it. Sorry, just keep speaking up. It's a little hard to hear you up the front. Data research reaction. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So
Take that as a comment.
Yeah.
More than
So we need
question.
not just the data. We need the ability to react and use the data. Yep. That human touch. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Matthew's got
Yeah, just to pick up on that, I guess I was we from the work that we've done, we've got these item banks, and we put a short version of them basically in front of some focus groups with people living with an intellectual disability. And I think the point that you made was a really good one, which was context, because we put these items in front of this group of people, or 3 different focus groups, and their answer to basically all of them was it depends, you know, and because context is so important. And I think that that's just a really important reminder that, you know, do you feel safe? It depends, and it actually really matters. You know, the data that I collect, I'll throw you under the bus, Jacki, as well. We can't tell. We don't see that context, and so trying to understand how we build a sense of safety really matters on that context, and we need different ways of capturing that information.
Excellent. Now, we are over time. I am going to wrap up. We do have 2 more questions that were about the Atlas. I won't ask you to answer them, but I will read them out. So, can Atlas data be linked to other data sets like DSS and Medicare? And is there a risk with the Children's Atlas that data can be misinterpreted by users? I guess I'd paraphrase and say all data is interpreted differently by different users. And it is really challenging to put that framing around it to help ensure that misinterpretation doesn't happen, but to allow for different interpretations that are very legitimate. I don't know if you can, 20 seconds, and then we'll let you out for lunch.
20 seconds, yes. That is a very important point to consider, and something that we consider on a daily basis. Our user base is incredibly diverse. So from, you know, you've got from academics who work with data daily, all the way down to community representatives who've never really looked at a data visualisation platform before. And while that is challenging, it's also incredibly exciting. And there are ways, and modern technology allows us to do a lot to kind of let people customise their experience as well. But we also spend a lot of time on actively working with users to raise data capability and to sort of make people's use of the data more informed and understanding what is in the platform.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. We'd better wrap up. Join me in thanking 3 amazing speakers.